Can you see me now? Great, thank you. Hey, first off, I just want to, on behalf of the thousands that have, participated in this summit so far, really thank Mary Leslie, Adam Lang, and that entire LABC team for leveraging technology and really pulling off another great summit this year. And Mary, personally, it's a privilege to play a small part in this summit that I think is of true significance and to moderate this segment on clean technology. So before I introduce our panelists, let me frame the clean transportation segment here and recognize that transportation's related greenhouse gas emissions in California really account for 40% of all emissions. And as Kate Gordon's told us this morning, when you factor in the refining and the manufacturing segments, probably well over 50% of emissions. So, to help address this, the transportation industry is undergoing a major transformation, to help create this cleaner, less congested, safer transportation system. And in June, California made history, as they often do, and when the Air Resources Board adopted the world's first zero-emission commercial truck requirement, the Advanced Clean Truck Rule. Following this action, no fewer than 15 states and the District of Columbia joined California in an MOU committed to transitioning 100% of medium and heavy-duty vehicles to be zero emissions by 2050. We are all seeing this dramatic uptick in passenger electrical vehicle sales and the rapid reduction of battery costs and their improvement in efficiencies. And all this is paired with that rollout of tens of thousands of EV chargers across the state. Here in LA, Metro continues to invest in the build out of its rail and bus systems, thanks to the billions of dollars raised through the passage of Measure M. And all of this is going on in the COVID-19 shelter-in-place order environment. And it's directly resulted to more companies adopting remote work policies like mine. And it's led to a remarkable reduction in the vehicles on the road and really allowed our active transportation projects to move forward more expeditiously and maybe give us all just a glimpse of California with clean air. So, the question now is, for this panel is, will these efforts be sustained and achievable? So helping me to unpack this will be a really distinguished group of panelists, and they're a great mix of public and private sector leaders, visionaries, researchers, and implementers. And frankly, they've been a lot of fun to work with. So, and I will let everyone know ahead of time that I challenge this group, to let's produce a segment that's truly memorable. We're experts in the field. Let's lean forward into this and boldly opine, if you will, where we are and what we need to do to further develop the technologies, the infrastructure requirements and the upgrades, find the funding needs and the sources, and really lean forward and predict the future for us all. So with that, let me introduce our panelists. Jim De La Rosa, Chief Planning Officer at LA Metro. And this is a two-term Chief Planning Officer at Metro. Jim held that role from 96 to 2005 and just recently came back in 2019. And it's really an exciting time as Metro is tasked with the expansion of light and heavy rail systems, heavy highway, HOV, rapid bus, BRT programs, a lot going on. I can see how that brought Jim back to Metro. And between those tenures, Jim served in 3 different major global transportation companies in executive positions. So glad to have you on the panel, Jim. Okay. Dr. Genevieve Giuliano, USC Director of METRANS Transportation Center at USC. Really a tremendous intellect, published over 170 papers, lectured around the globe, and that relationship between land use and transportation, travel behavior, understanding how information technology and applications and big data is really changing the transportation future. She's a past chair of the executive committee of the TRB, the Transportation Research Board, and she's the recipient of so many distinguished scholarships and service awards. We can't even have the time to go through them all, but really pleased to have you, Jen, on the panel. David Kim, Secretary of California State Transportation Agency, over 40,000 employees. The mission of advancing safe, environmentally sustainable transportation systems to maximize the mobility here in California. And you know, Secretary Kim is a longtime transportation leader, served in 3 levels of government, as well as 2 years in the private sector with Hyundai Motor Company. So Secretary, really honored to have you with us. And then Mary Nichols, Chair of the California Air Resources Board, really made news again here in June. Impressive career. She served on this board under 3 governors, starting with Edmund Brown, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who we all saw this morning, and now with Governor Newsom. So she's a former California Secretary of Natural Resources in the Gray Davis administration, and a former assistant administrator for the U.S. EPA's Office of Air and Radiation in the Clinton years. And not to shortchange the cross rivalry, she also led the Institute of Environment and Sustainability at UCLA. So Mary's contributed in a number of ways. Great to have you with us. And finally, Matt Petersen, President, CEO of LA Cleantech Incubator. Really a noble mission to an inclusive green economy with priorities in accelerating the transportation electrification, clean energy, and sustainable cities. And I think many on the broadcast know Matt as the first Chief Sustainability Officer in the city of LA for Mayor Garcetti, and largely credited as the Chief Architect for the groundbreaking Sustainable City Plan, which has really put LA in a great light globally, looking at the EV and the goals for sustainable energy and water. So with that, I'm going to start turning to questions. And if I could ask our panelists to be bold again, but be bold in 2 to 3 minutes for each of these questions, okay? All right, Mary, I want to start with you. You know, the Advanced Clean Truck ruling, you know, has been such a major development this year. So 3-part question. You know, number 1, you know, what do you estimate the impact of this legislation will have on the environment? 2, do you believe the technologies are available today to meet these mandates? And 3, will there be additional capital and operating costs per vehicle over the costs associated with producing and operating that current class of commercial vehicles?
Forgot to unmute. Thank you.
Gotcha, Mary.
Okay. So the first thing to say is that anything we do in California has an impact way beyond California. If we were only going by trucks that are actually purchased in California, it would still be significant because of the size of our state and the symbolism. But the day that we actually enacted, the day the board voted on the regulation, we also had representatives of 10 states who stood up verbally or virtually and said they were going to do the same thing. So we already come in with a powerful coalition of state governments, not to mention local governments, that are also following and adopting what we're doing here in California. The technology to achieve this regulation, which is only one part of actually a multi-part omnibus regulation that we're working on, it represents a mandate to the manufacturers to build and sell the zero-emission vehicles on the order of what it will take to get us to our 2050 zero net carbon goal. But it is bracketed by two other important regulations. One being a purchase mandate, a fleet rule, which will go into effect next year. But that doesn't come before the board until after the first of the year 2021. And then another regulation, which got a little bit less attention, but I think is also important, which works quite aggressively to reduce emissions from diesel or other liquid fueled traditional heavy duty vehicles. And the reason why that's important is because it will drive both more investment in the cleanest alternative fuels, and it also helps to reduce any incentive that there might be for people to purchase older technology vehicles that don't get us where we need to go for health and the environment. So this is a suite of regulations which we've been working on for at least 6 years now. And even during the time that we were writing the rules, life changed. Technologies which were considered speculative, possible, suddenly were out in demonstration versions. But the impact of this set of rules is that will take us from demonstrated, known, but not widely available technology to really a scale up. And we're seeing not only the big current manufacturers of heavy duty vehicles, but also new companies springing up, as well as suppliers, people who want to get into the business of repairing and maintaining these new generation vehicles. So it's a whole transformation. It really is. We use the word transformational. It may be a cliche, but that is what has to happen to our transportation system. It's the vehicles, the fuels, and how they're used, and all of those things are changing. So big deal. Now, is this going to be affordable? The answer is it will take a few years before purchase prices are fully competitive, and that's where we have to have bridging policies of incentives, and we need a whole bunch of different kinds of incentives, regulatory and financial incentives, to help bring some parity in, so that companies that want to invest are able to do it. And we're exploring a lot of ideas, and needless to say, in a time when we're, the economy is going to be very challenged for a few years while we come back from the COVID recession, we're going to have to be more creative. But we are determined, and we have the support of our governor, our sister agencies, and many private sector investors who are looking for how best to make this transformation happen, and hopefully make money doing it.
Wonderful. That's great, Mary. So just so I can, we can be clear. So you say there are known technologies that are being,
Yes.
but not widely available. Are there any technologies that are still in theory and yet to be put into at least bench scale testing or actual practice?
Well, I'm sure there are things out there. I was on a call earlier today. This is Climate Week in New York. And so I've had an opportunity to meet some people that I hadn't known before. And one of the questions that came up was about, whatever happened to the idea of putting solar on the roof of a truck and letting it recharge itself while it goes down the highway. And the answer on that one seems to be there's not enough space, even on a very large Class 8 truck, for the amount and weight of a panel that you would need to actually, generate enough electricity to keep the truck going. But there certainly are innovations happening in two areas that I know of. One is renewable hydrogen and ways to generate and distribute hydrogen for fuel cells, because fuel cells are part of this mix as well. It's not only batteries that we're going to need in certain applications. We think that there will be a nice market for fuel cells. And the other is thinking about your commercial vehicles, and especially the largest on-road trucks, as part of an integrated system, so that The truck is not necessarily just a truck or a truck and a driver, but it's a part of the system that fuels a whole facility, like a big warehouse and distribution complex, where in the event of power shortages or challenges, or where there are, fires in the area or any of the other things that we're now having to think about as part of existing climate change, the truck becomes an energy source itself, because when it was charged, it created a little storage facility that could then be reversed to provide electricity to a building. On a small scale, we already are seeing some of this V2G, as they call it, going on. In Japan, it's been very important, and we think that given both the expense and the challenges right now of sort of a full electricity system to serve all the needs we have, that these kind of new uses are also going to be an important part of the future.
That's neat. That's wonderful, Mary. Great. If I could maybe move on to Secretary Kim. Secretary Kim, how is the State Transportation Agency advancing electrified transportation future?
Thank you very much, Pete. It's good to see you and the rest of the panel. Thank you for bringing us together. We are going all out to advance electrification across all vehicle classes, light duty, medium, heavy duty. And because we are the transportation agency, it is our responsibility to work closely with transit agencies. And I'm so glad Jim De La Loza from LA Metro is on this panel. We're working closely with Metro and other transit agencies throughout the state to help them as they make the transition to zero emission bus. They are required to do so by 2040. And so they're all fully committed to that, and we're grateful for that. They need our help though. They need help from a funding standpoint. Mary referred to the affordability factor, and the average zero emission bus is about $1 million, maybe a little under $1 million, compared to about $500,000 for a conventional CNG or diesel bus. So agencies like LA Metro and others need help getting there. And so we have been awarding grants from the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program to help agencies purchase zero emission buses, whether it's battery electric or hydrogen fuel cell, and also to help fund the cost of charging infrastructure and maintenance facilities. And so we awarded just a couple months ago $500 million worth of grants to agencies like Long Beach Transit, Santa Monica Big Blue Bus, Antelope Valley Transit, and so forth and so on to really help them make that transition. So that's a big piece. I also want to say that everybody on this panel agrees that electrification is a key strategy. But I will say that it goes beyond that as well. Our job is to make sure we expand and maximize mobility options, encourage greater mode shift, that is reducing the tendency among all of us to hop in our car and drive solo, and also to reduce VMT, vehicle miles traveled. And so that's a function of a number of things. Transit. We need transit to not just survive the crisis, but to emerge and to thrive in the future, given high levels of unemployment, given the fact that more and more people will not be able to own and afford a car. Transit is essential for our future. Also, active transportation, pedestrian and bike facilities. We're going all out to advance those projects. And I will say, Pete, since you wanted us to be provocative, this is not your father's Caltrans. Caltrans is no longer the same agency it was 50, 40, 30 years ago as it is today. Yes, there are still highway engineers who work at Caltrans, but this is a different Caltrans, aggressively moving forward on pedestrian and bike projects and complete streets. So it's completely different. Also want to call attention to micro-mobility options and strategies. E-scooters, e-bikes, they're becoming all the rage, and they're coming back even as we gradually work our way through the pandemic. And then pricing strategies, congestion pricing, cordon pricing, dynamic pricing strategies. You take all of those things together, combined with electrification, and I think we're going to be able to move the needle in a big way when it comes to reducing GHGs and getting to carbon neutrality.
That's great. Well, Mr. Secretary, you talked about $500 million in grants here just recently. Do you see that trend increasing? And where do you see the primary recipients of that flow?
That grant program comes from the cap and trade program. And as you may know, cap and trade tends to vary from year to year. We went through a little bit of a dip in the cap and trade auction from May. The most recent auction results were much better. And so the amount of money we have available to award in the form of grants will vary from year to year. But again, $500 million this year. The next cycle will be in 2022. And we don't know, it's too early to say how much we'll be able to award. But this is a program, a critically important program to help agencies make that transition, as well as extend and expand their projects and their network, just like LA Metro is doing with their 28 and 28 project. I'm sure we'll hear about that from Jim.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if I might, maybe Jim, why don't I shift now and the Metro's goal to electrify its whole bus fleet, 2,300, I think, by 2030, right? A little more catchy than 2040. How are you going to do that? And what particularly are those infrastructure needs that you have to affect that transition?
Yeah, I think that, first of all, I want to thank a number of our partners here, especially Secretary Kim. I think it's good to be working with you again. I think as he mentioned, we have a fairly aggressive program, and it's a multimodal program. It goes including everything from pedestrian improvements to a significant investment in transit. On the bus side, there's a whole process to relook at the bus system, both in terms of reorganizing the system under the Next Gen program that our operations group has developed, to a very aggressive program to deal to the conversion to clean fuel, to 100% clean fuel fleet by 2030. It's a very aggressive goal. How we're going to do it, I think Metro has a significant, thanks to Measure M, a program, and is complementing that with partnering with the state, with the federal government, working on identifying grants. We've been successful so far. I think right now, the orange line is moving towards completion of conversion to clean fuel by the end of the year. We are moving on to the silver line. So we will be phasing it in aggressively. Again, with that goal, 2030 goal is a very aggressive goal, but I think our board has been very direct to us to meet the goal, and we'll do everything we can to do so. And again, it will be, as we do with every project, we will look at our resources that we were going within our long-range transportation plan, and then supplement that through grants and through partnering both public and private to put in place the capacity, the other improvements that are needed for the full conversion, and again, moving from to 100% clean fuel fleet.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jim, if it's not your father's Caltrans, it certainly doesn't sound like your mother's Metro, right? So,
no. And
what?
I've seen significant change since 15 years I've been away. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, that's great. So, what are those upgrades that you see in the infrastructure system to get us to 2030, heck, even to get us to 2028 in the Olympics? What are the upgrades? What goes first? When? What are the funding, the priorities that you have? Yeah.
We are very focused on implementing the Measure M program. And right now, we have the most aggressive capital improvement program in the country, and maybe even greater than that. We currently have a number of rail projects. We will have 22 transit corridors in place. We're putting in place over 100 more miles of transit, fixed guideway transit. We are also making investments in the rest of the system, I think, as we said. On the bus system, this is we're trying to improve a system, not necessarily any particular line, but our mobility is complex, and we have to put in place a complete structure that allows us options to move in a clean and efficient manner. Again, the program will involve the new projects. We will have 22 additional transit corridors in place, and that's everything from bikeways through BRT projects, through fixed guideway projects, completion of some of the bigger. I have to move a little bit in here to keep the lights on, but sorry. But completion of the Metro's subway program down Wilshire Boulevard, the Purple Line, again, projects currently in place, Crenshaw and so on, but a very aggressive program. But again, I mentioned it's a multimodal program, and we are also have significant investments in the improvement of both the highway and arterial system. We can't forget that our buses operate on arterials, and the speed of those arterials is very important to us, because a bus that is moving faster moves more people faster and more efficiently. Way back with the Metro Rapid project on Wilshire Boulevard, we were able to achieve a 35% increase in speed with the Rapid Bus program, which resulted in a 45% increase in ridership. Again, the relationship of speed, efficiency, and improved ridership is key to us. So we are going to be paying a lot of focus on arterials and how we use those arterials most efficiently.
Great, Tim. Well, if I could switch to Dr. Giuliano, steep decline since the last recession in emissions here, since 2013, both locally and statewide. Why is that? And, why has it proved so difficult to reduce that transport sector greenhouse gas emissions?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for inviting me. This is a very interesting panel, and I will do my best to make it memorable. Right. So I'm going to start with why are we seeing what we're seeing? And I'm going to talk about the passenger side first. Basically, we had a real significant Great Recession that reduced employment and that reduced people's incomes, and had a particularly negative effect on the younger generation that would have been out looking for jobs and so on at that time. Things started to turn around in the 2012-13 kind of time frame. We've been on a long economic recovery, economic growth recovery, slow but steady ever since then. And when we think about travel, all the main drivers of travel are jobs, disposable income, and population. So as jobs are increasing, as income is increasing, we expect to see more mobility, more moving around of everybody, and that's exactly what we're seeing. So what we saw in the depths of the recession were some hints that we thought, well, maybe finally we've kind of hit the maximum of travel, and we will start to see some decline. And in particular, it was encouraging to see that the millennials, for example, had reduced their rates of car ownership and use relative to earlier generations. The boomers are aging, and so they are moving out of their most mobile time in their lives. So all of this seemed to be an indication that maybe we would reverse the trend. However, once we started to have significant economic growth, and those millennials started to have opportunities, moved out of the house, bought their cars, and so on, and we're back to a very kind of constant historical rate of increase in BMT. Nationally, that's about 2 to 2.5% per year, and that's been going on for several decades. So these are kind of structural trends. So why is it difficult then to turn these things around? And on the passenger side, we have to kind of recognize that personal vehicles are the most convenient mode for most people for most trips. And we have a whole spate of public policies that help to make them cheap and easy to use. Even though California has one of the highest fuel taxes in the country, fuel taxes are low relative to taxes in other countries in the rest of the world. We have a stable insurance system. We have a high quality road system. We do not place surcharges on vehicles, on new vehicles, and so on. So in terms of cost and convenience, we've allowed the personal car to be the most convenient and at a great bargain for the most part. And what we're seeing as a result, of course, is this kind of structural decline in both carpooling and transit use, even though we've been making these large investments in transit. So the bottom line here is that we would have to do something to change that comparison if we want to dramatically change how people are traveling. So we've done a lot of things, I think, that are definitely steps in the right direction. We have hot lanes today that we didn't have before. We're much more aware of parking charges and controlling parking. We are aware of the value of complete streets. We have established auto-free zones in some places. So we're taking a lot of really positive steps to sort of move the needle, as David Kim said. But also I think in recognizing that, like it or not, that we're going to have a lot of cars on the road. The other thing that California is doing, right, is pursuing very aggressively these ZEV targets. And we have, I think, more than any other state, provided incentives and subsidies for zero emission vehicle purchases. And we're seeing the benefits of that because California, I believe, has roughly 50% of all of the electric vehicle sales in the United States. We also have the low carbon fuel standard that Mary referred to, which helps us to drive carbon out of fuel no matter what the engine propulsion technology is. So I think we're moving in the right direction. It's a lot of work because essentially we're pushing that boulder uphill.
Mm-hmm. Right, right. Well, you know, talking about passenger cars, maybe we can shift a little bit. Here we're sitting in one of the nation's busiest ports, and, you know, shift from passenger vehicles to truck and goods movements, and which would include rail. You know, what do you think are the most effective strategies in that segment to decarbonize, and how can we pay for it?
Well, I think we have to think about what is our time frame. In 2050, I think we're going to have a lot of options. So the problems that we're facing today, particularly in the heavy duty truck area, we don't have a battery today that can perform anything close to what the conventional diesel can. So we'd have to invest a great deal, given current technology, to try to move some of the fleet to an electric fleet. That's going to change. Post 2030, we're going to have much better batteries with much more power. At the same time, you mentioned hydrogen, I believe. Hydrogen seems to have a great deal of promise in the heavy duty sector. It does not have the problem that electricity has, in the sense that we don't need a 5,000-pound battery to carry around along with the freight that we're supposed to be carrying around. So there's a lot of sort of interest and more research, I believe, at the state level, looking at the potential for hydrogen and looking at, as Mary said, renewable hydrogen possibilities, because from a technology standpoint, that has more promise for carrying very heavy loads. Mm-hmm. In the short term, I think it's important for us to think about the possibilities of hybrid, which in the heavy duty sector can substitute for a diesel today very easily. And then you kind of have the best of both worlds, because you can run on electricity some part of the time, especially around vulnerable neighborhoods, for example. And you can have the constant charging that goes along with the ICE engine. So all of those things I think are promising. You asked me about pay for it. The pay for question is a huge question, of course, because it's not just about subsidizing the purchase of vehicles. And in this case, for trucking companies, not for the public sector. So that's politically a little more challenging. But the infrastructure definitely has to be built. If we want to use heavy duty battery electric trucks in any significant way, we would need a network of charging stations so that trucks are not required to return home to a home base or to a specific place to recharge. They could recharge in transit, and that would give them a lot more range. So that's one thing we really need to think about. And then the other thing we need to think about is, where do we have to upgrade the electric grid in places that have heavy clusters of trucks, where we would expect a very heavy demand on the grid if we were going forward. So those are, I think, the big things that we need to think about.
So you foresee a world where there'll still be a need for significant, say, government subsidies. Would you see private capital being able to play in this transition?
I think private capital certainly plays with hybrids. They're really not a problem right now. The subsidies are needed right now because the battery electric truck cannot do the same work as a diesel truck. So you've got kind of two things going for you here. One is the battery electric truck is about 2 or 3 times as pricey as a brand new diesel. And it has a shorter range and would be out of service more hours of the day. So right now, that means that we'd have to invest in an awful lot of battery electric trucks, and that would require subsidies to do.
Right. Great. Well, great. Let me switch over to Matt. So the LA Cleantech Incubator, you released that zero emissions 2028 roadmap here recently. Matt, what are those main recommendations in the study, and what do you see as truly achievable in this next 3 to 5 year horizon?
Thanks, Pete. Yes, Mary and the California Resources Board, Metro, and Jim's boss, Phil Washington, the mayor, Eric Garcetti, who was on earlier today, utilities, Edison and DWP, who have spoken here today. They're all members of our transportation partnership, and together, along with our private sector partners like BMW, Tesla, and Audi, labor like IBW Local 11, all announced a set of targets last November to accelerate the move to zero emissions transportation and goods movement by the time the world arrives for the Olympics in 2028. And it's a 3-pronged focus. A lot of specific targets we can break out, but they're primarily, how do we get 30% of all the cars on the road to be electric by 2028? How do we get 20% mode shift, more people out of their cars and into transit or active transit, public or active transit? It means making the streets safer. We talked a little bit about that earlier. Secretary Kim addressed some of that. And of course, goods movement. How do we convert all of our public subsidy towards zero emissions transportation infrastructure as well as trucks, which Genevieve hit on? And I will plug something that CARB should be releasing any day now, which is a pilot funding for 100 BEV battery electric trucks or zero emission trucks that will be about drayage. And I think if we break down that market for just a second, given we were just talking about trucks, those short haul routes in and out of the ports of LA and Long Beach, where 40% of all the goods come into the US through those 2 ports, there are a number of routes, whether it's within 10 miles or a few miles or out to the Inland Empire, that the battery electric trucks that are coming to market now from Volvo as well as Daimler, the largest seller of trucks, who have both decided to skip over hydrogen and focus primarily their next wave of technology investment to all be electric trucks. And those trucks are made in places like Oregon, or Volvo's instance in Pennsylvania. And those trucks will be already on the road, but now we'll see them at scale within the next year to 18 months. And of course, Tesla has announced a pretty bold, provocative product that will be close to competitive on the price and certainly the range. But that that market of drayage, that short haul route, I think we're going to see product to meet those needs. And as we get demand, those pricing will go down. And that's why our organization and partnership are focused on the charging infrastructure. We need to get near the ports and out in the Inland Empire and throughout that whole 710 and related corridors where so many of those trucks run.
Mm-hmm.
So the partnership has set these targets. We're moving together to achieve them. We've proposed some solutions like a California EV authority that Senator Henry Stern introduced as legislation this past session to help them accelerate and enhance the coordination required as well as the financing. And so we're really getting all the players involved. And on the private sector, we also have some truck manufacturers involved already, like BYD, that are producing trucks on the road now. And we're also doing pilots together in low-income disadvantaged communities where we need, as Secretary Kim touched on, need some of these mobility solutions where you don't have scooters dropped off in the morning, you don't have a car necessarily in the parking spot or driveway, let alone an electric vehicle. So we're delivering, with the support of the state legislature and others, micromobility solutions to places like Leimert Park with e-bikes, EV car sharing in Pacoima and San Pedro. And then we're taking other innovations in the business and policy model framework to see how we can innovate zero-emission last-mile delivery zones. And that we're starting in Santa Monica, and we'll be announcing our partners, some pretty big names that are coming in to join us there. So all these things are coming together to help LA really accelerate the move in a bold way to not just meet our local goals and air quality priorities, but help California lead and continue to lead economically, despite having because of having the most aggressive greenhouse gas emission regulations and laws in the world, where our economy is continuing to grow. Even with this recession, we'll continue to see that as we come throughout the other side of it.
Yeah. So Matt, I mean, it sounds like the recommendations in the partnerships you've been forming, you're confident that those recommendations can be achieved in the next 3 to 5 years.
Well, they're bold. I mean, we do have 7 years, 8 years. We don't want to get ahead of ourselves. We're not going to get to them in 5 years. But I think in our partnership, I think that the indicators are that we're heading in the right direction. The charging infrastructure on the light duty side is picking up the pace. We have some work to do in certain segments in certain parts of the state and the region. Heavy duty charging, we definitely need to invest in. We're beginning to see that investment both from the private sector and the public sector. And then we need some creativity. I don't want to gloss over what Secretary Kim said earlier and what Metro has been working on, which is pricing. We need to put a price on congestion and pollution. We know that London has done this and done it successfully and has continued to embrace it both on congestion and pollution. It's not easy. People don't want to put a price on beyond what they're already paying at the pump or increasingly at the plug. And as we move from pump to plug, how do we make sure that equity is addressed? We don't want to put an undue burden on lower income families who struggle to get access to transportation, which is a barrier to upward economic mobility. So we have to really make sure we're putting these solutions in a comprehensive way that really adjusts for those factors. But those are the kinds of things that we need. And we also need, in this current COVID economic situation, as Mary touched on, we need a bold federal stimulus. And that's why our partnership with 50 other organizations and companies for a total of 80 business groups, labor, private companies recommended to Congress $150 billion as part of a larger, what was then being talked about as a $2 trillion infrastructure stimulus, be put towards manufacturing and incentives for rebates, charging infrastructure and utility upgrades, job training, public and active transit to head to zero emissions. Jim talked about that move to all electric buses by 2030. We need a comprehensive approach as we look to restart our economy and make this country continue to focus on the priorities that we need to for jobs.
So much is hanging on a stimulus, right? And I guess I'm broadly thinking about how do we unlock private capital markets. There's a lot of capital out there that's looking for a place to play. There are some impediments, regulatory impediments, among others. What do you see? What would be your plan, your process to unlock that private capital, and what kind of legislation might be required at the state, county, or or city levels?
Well, the county and Metro, following the county's lead, there was a purchasing preference put. If you're based in the county, you get I think it was an 8% price differential, and then Metro built on that with its bus procurement policy. Now we have BYD and Proterra manufacturing and assembling buses here in LA County. Those are creating jobs right here in LA, and we're seeing increased demand, and the product prices of those products are coming down. So there's both the power of the purse to get manufacturing and job creation locally, and that's a big part of what LABC does with our startups and bringing them here and providing them access to capital, and that's really critical. In this case, I think we're also seeing, as we've seen solar go from needing subsidy early on, when it was $8 a watt to now it's below 50 cents a watt. We've seen that price disruption both on the investment on the manufacturing side and on the demand side, supply and demand. So we're going to see that on the electric vehicle from light to heavy duty. I think we're going to begin to move off of the need for light duty subsidy by middle of the decade, towards the middle, latter half of the decade for sure. And then it's going to take a little longer for heavy duty. Medium duty is going to be a lot faster than people realize. We're seeing a lot of demand, and that duty cycle is going to be met. So I think private capital is getting off the sidelines already. There are some things that we can do as interventions. Can we, find ways to unlock some bigger infrastructure for capital to invest in the charging, so it's not all driven by public subsidy initially? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Creative things.
Right. Well, unfortunately, I think we're getting short on time out, so I want to kind of put us all in a little bit of a lightning round, maybe a 10 to 15 second kind of response. And so, and we'll kind of go around the horn. And Matt, since you're up, you can start, and then we'll go around the horn. So first question for everybody is, how likely do you think we're going to snap back to those days of heavy congestion, increased smog, beyond what we're seeing now? We're right now, when we've got a COVID-19 vaccine and treatment, that post world, are we going to snap right back, Matt?
Well, I know I'm not getting in my car every day like I used to, my electric car. Yet I see, when I do, the congestion, I see traffic picking up again. That means the economy is restarted and is picking up the pace. So
it sounds like yes, you think we will?
It's yes.
All right, Secretary Kim? Do you see a change in everybody's approach still in a post-COVID, with treatment and a vaccine?
Well, I think what's really unique about the moment we're in is that the crisis presents an opportunity to really pause, reflect, and perhaps rethink our transportation system, and hopefully rebound in a way that is healthier and more sustainable and equitable. And I think the pandemic really makes abundantly clear, perhaps more than ever, the importance of active transportation, walking and biking, and advancing options that promote better health and equity. And I think Professor Giuliano mentioned it. A number of cities have adopted auto-free zones, also called Slow Streets Initiative. Cities like LA, Oakland, and others have closed off certain streets to vehicular traffic to give pedestrians and bicyclists more space to travel while physically distancing. It's a terrific idea, and it is my fervent hope that cities like LA, Oakland, and others convert those from pilot projects to something more permanent. It makes a lot of sense in a COVID world.
Okay. So unless we have some drivers, there's a real risk that we'll snap back, it sounds like, from your perspective.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Jim, what do you think?
I think if we can let go of this opportunity to implement some of the programs that we've been talking about for years. I think demand management and congestion management are key. When we did our long-range transportation plan, we put in place an aggressive to test congestion management, BMTPs, others, and we found we can more than double the mode split. And I think we talked earlier about the mode split, but also key to that is telecommuting. And I think we need to take advantage of this to put in place some of those elements that have resulted in reduced trips, and then couple that with continuing to work on the management, demand management, and congestion management.
Right. Professor Giuliano.
Well, I'm going to say that people generally want to go back to business as usual after a crisis. And this is a huge crisis, and people are going to be really happy in some ways to go back to business as usual. However, if they have experienced things that make their life better, then they might adapt those too. So actually, I see the possibility of a big increase in working from home relative to business as usual, because that is positively affecting a lot of people rather than negatively.
Right.
So I
Okay.
think yes,
Very good.
with a caveat.
All right. Mary?
I think I'm closer to Jen. I see big changes among the people that I work with, many of whom are taking advantage of this opportunity to turn in cars where the lease was up and not get a new one, and make a decision that they are either not going back to work at all, I mean, in an office, as opposed to working from home because they can work from home, or at least that they're changing their life in a way that involves a lot less getting around in cars. So I'm saying I think those changes may not be enough. I'm sure they're not, but they're indicative of what's possible.
It won't be pre-COVID, though, for sure.
Right.
You think behaviors have changed? Okay. All right. Yes, no, or maybe, and we'll go around. So, is a ban on fossil fuel vehicles inevitable to achieve these targets, or do you think the market will adopt and adapt, and commercially available technologies will take over? We won't have to legislate a ban on fossil fuels. So yes, no, maybe. Mary?
No.
No. Professor Giuliano?
No.
Jim?
No.
Matt?
Oh, well, you know, in Europe, they're moved up their target for banning internal combustion engines. So I think it's a mix of the market and regulation. We're headed that way no matter what.
Okay. And Secretary Kim?
No.
No. All right. There you have it. Rachel, how are we doing? We still have, I think we're about at time, aren't we? Yep. I hear yep on that. So, hey, I just wanted to say thanks again to the panelists. I could have stayed on for another hour or so, easy, and really unpack some more questions, but I really appreciate the spirited discussion. You did achieve what we had set out to be. I think this was memorable. And I'd like to just thank you for your participation, and know that this is a group that is going to shape the future, and we'll all be watching carefully, and we'll all be there to support in any way we can as we go forward and towards clean transportation. So thanks again to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.